Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
MIB encounter, woman abducted in Midland, Michigan. I was standing behind my screen door in the front of my home. I saw an old car parked next door with two men dressed in black, forcing a screaming young girl into their vehicle. The men saw that I was watching and came to my home. When I saw them coming, I quickly shut the door. I thought to myself, had I locked the back door? They spoke to me telepathically and told me that they could get in, even if the door was locked, and told me to open the front door, which I did. They were around 6 feet tall, had top hats, and their skin was grayish. I thought they had wraparound sunglasses on because their eyes were almond shaped. I tried to lead them out of the living room because I had an 8-month-old baby in a car bed there. The next thing I remember was them asking me if I would give them eggs from my body, saying that where they came from they needed genetic material from other races, because they had reached a point where they were having problems. I told them they could have my eggs, but they were to remove my genes from them, that they belonged to my husband. I then felt intense pain in my abdomen and I screamed. I thought to myself that maybe the neighbors would hear me and call the police. They told me the neighbors couldn't hear me and I realized that I wasn't in my home. All during this time they didn't let me see their faces. I remember fighting them as they were implanting something in my nose. One of them said to another that he put one in my breast too. The next thing I remember is that I was in a craft, and the pilot was having problems with the craft, and had landed it in Sag Harbor, Nova Scotia. I could read a sign on a dock that said it was government property and no trespassing. I was told that the government knew all about them. When the craft regained power, he took me under the water and showed me an underwater dome city. I asked where were all the people. I could see buildings and streetlights but no people. The next thing that happened, I was taken to a mountain that opened up and we flew inside it. I was made to walk down a hallway where there were creatures that they kept locked up. I could hear a man screaming like he was being eaten alive. I asked where they got their people and was told meet transients. Then I was put on a bus where the windows were blocked so I couldn't see out. I was taken to a room where there was an old man standing behind a desk. He informed me that I was going to be seen by a man who would decide what would happen to me. I remember being told that if I told anyone about my abduction or what I had seen, that they would hurt my children. The next thing I remember, I was back home behind the door in my living room, and I was bleeding vaginally. I told my husband what had happened and we both kept quiet for years. When I told one of my son's wives, my son had a bad attack of shingles, and he was only in his early 40s. This is my story.
MIB on the New York State Museum elevator. After hearing story after story of strange encounters with strange men dressed in black suits, I wanted to tell a story from my childhood that to this day I have been unable to explain. This took place in 2001 when I was 8 years old. It was summer and I was on a field trip with my town's community center daycare program. We were at the New York State Museum in Albany, New York. I was in a group with maybe 2 or 3 other kids and one of the daycare workers for a chaperone. We got there in the morning and were told we could roam around the museum with our group until either 12 or 1 when we had to meet back up with everyone for lunch on the 3rd floor. Our group walked around, looking at all the exhibits, and after a while, we realized we had lost track of time. We only had a few minutes to get up to the 3rd floor for lunch and attendance, and we were on the other side of the museum from where the elevators are. We hurried quickly to the lobby and hopped into an elevator. Out of breath from the near sprint we had done to the lobby, our group piled into the elevator, we hit the 3rd floor button, and my chaperone said we had made it in time, and that we still had a minute or so to spare. Then as the doors were closing, an extremely well-dressed man walked into the elevator. He was wearing black shoes, a black suit with a white dress shirt, black tie, black leather gloves, and a black fedora, and was carrying a black leather briefcase. At the time I thought nothing of it, but I've always looked back at this and thought this was very odd as it was summer, and he was dressed for the dead of winter. As the man got on, I noticed that he kept his head down, almost as though he didn't want us to see his face. He quickly turned around, only then lifting his head. He just stood there with his back to us, and I don't remember ever seeing him select a floor. The elevator doors closed, and this eerie feeling seemed to be emanating from the man in black. We had left the lobby on the 1st floor and were going up the 3rd floor, so the ride should have been maybe 10 or 20 seconds at most. The elevator's display showed we had arrived at the 3rd floor, but the elevator didn't stop. The numbers just kept climbing, and we were definitely still moving. I want to preface this by saying those elevators in the lobby only have access to 4 floors, and to my knowledge the museum only has 4 above ground floors. I'll talk more about that at the end. At this point, it had been well over a minute since the elevator started moving, and the numbers on the display continued to climb, as did the elevator. That eerie feeling that had been seemingly emanating from this man was getting more intense, and the air in the elevator was beginning to get extremely heavy. This seemed to get more and more noticeable as we continued to go up. The higher the elevator climbed, the feeling turned from eerie to foreboding. I remember getting the feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when you know something bad is going to happen. Something definitely wasn't right. The display was saying we had passed the 50th floor and we were still climbing. At this point it had been around 5 minutes in the elevator. The atmosphere in the elevator had gotten almost unbearable. This heavy, ominous feeling was something I've never experienced since. The closest thing I can compare it to is that feeling you get when you walk down a dark hallway after watching a horror movie, and even that doesn't begin to describe this. Suddenly, the elevator stops. There's a sudden shift in the atmosphere of the elevator. It went from this foreboding feeling to a feeling of impending doom. Then I remember an almost panic when I thought about was on the other side of those doors. I was telling myself over and over again that the buttons on the elevator don't go past the 4th floor, so there aren't any floors beyond that, so whatever on the other side of those doors can't possibly exist. This whole experience can't possibly have happened, and when the doors open I'll see all my friends from the other groups eating lunch, and everything will be okay. But that's not what happened. And this is where things have always gotten fuzzy for me. I remember getting on the elevator with my group, the man walking in, and the elevator going up. But I can't remember my group being in the elevator after a certain point. I know it was at least 5 minutes from the time we entered the elevator before it stopped, and yet I can't tell you how much time passed between when the elevator stopped and when the doors opened. I can remember looking at the display to see what floor we were on, but can't remember what it said. I remember being frozen there, with no sound or movement whatsoever. I remember feeling like if those doors opened, something bad was going to happen, to the point where I remember panicking inside my head, pretending that none of this wasn't happening. But every time I opened my eyes that sinister man was still standing there, as still as a statue. And then all of a sudden, the man who was responsible for all of this, who had not moved a single muscle since the elevator doors closed, drops his briefcase. Not even a second after the briefcase hit the ground, the doors of the elevator opened. And yet I can't remember what was beyond those doors. I have tried for the last 18 years to remember and have never been able to see it. I just remember it being wide and bright. The man then calmly picked up his briefcase, tipped his fedora, almost as to bid us goodbye, and walked off the elevator. I then remember the doors closing and that ominous feeling being gone, and in an instant we were on the 3rd floor and the doors popped open. Only then do I remember seeing the rest of my group on the elevator. All of them looking as terrified as I did, especially our chaperone. Looking out, I saw the rest of the kids and chaperones from the other groups. We walked out of the elevator and had been expecting to be extremely late for lunch, but we had made it on time. Which is impossible, because we had initially made it to the elevator a minute or so before lunch started, and that encounter on the elevator had lasted at least 5 or 10 minutes. I remember our chaperone pulling the other adults aside, and I assume told them what had happened to us on that elevator. I remember sitting at the table with my friends eating a pizza Lunchable and the kids from my group and I sharing the story of what had just happened, no one believing us. I remember the chaperone I had avoided the subject for the rest of the day, and the other kids in my group seemed to have dropped it as well. I remember that I told my mom what had happened, and I've always felt as though she didn't believe me. But before writing this, I wanted to make sure that really did happen since I was so young, and it had been well over a decade since this happened, and that it wasn't something my mind made up over the years, or maybe just a very vivid dream. So I asked my mom if she remembered me telling her about this, and she said she did. She remembers picking me up from the community center, and the second we got into the car I had told her all about the man in black, and the elevator going up all these floors, and even that he had dropped his briefcase. She said she also remembers me telling her that he had said something to me, though she doesn't remember what, and I don't have any memory of him saying anything. So there is my story. 18 years later, I still have absolutely no clue who that man was, where the elevator took us, what was beyond the doors, where the man walked off, or anything that happened in that elevator. I just know that it happened. I have no idea how long we were in that elevator, it could have been minutes or even hours, but what I do know is that time seems to have been separate from our reality, since no time had actually passed when we got to the 3rd floor. Hopefully you have heard something similar, or at least, have an idea what happened. I've gone through every explanation I can think of, and none of them make sense. From not remembering correctly what elevator we got on, and perhaps getting in one somewhere else, but that's impossible for reasons I've listed in the paragraph below this. I've thought maybe it was a really vivid dream, but my mom remembers me telling her, right after picking me up from daycare, the day of the field trip. I've even considered a gas leak in the elevator causing us to hallucinate. The one thought that's always been in the back of my mind has been that we got onto the elevator and took a ride through another dimension. Just a little side note, I had a job with a catering company in the Albany area last summer, and one of the most common venues we catered at was the New York State Museum. Over that summer, I rode probably every public elevator in that building, and even a cargo elevator they have, and not a single one I rode on had any buttons beyond the 4th floor. Yes.
Shapeshifter Man in Black attack female conference attendee in Irvine, California. I was up on the roof of the hotel watching the 2015 eclipse of the moon with a few other people from a conference I was attending in Irvine, California. Around 10:30 p.m. I decided to go to my hotel room and pack so that I could catch my flight in the morning. My roommate was already in the room and was watching TV. She had already packed her things. There was a strange bottle by my bed which had green liquid inside and a label which said bio-cleaner on it. I commented to my roommate how odd it was for that bottle to be there and that the hotel staff would use bio-cleaner to clean a hotel room. I then moved the bottle from beside my bed to behind the TV because I did not want to sleep next to it. We talked for approximately an hour as I packed my things and got ready for bed. Then we both tried to sleep. About 30 minutes later, my roommate asked if I was still awake. I said yes, I could not sleep, and she said that she felt the same way. She got up, got dressed and went downstairs to see who else was still awake. After she left the room, I heard her loudly talking in the hallway with 2 male voices. Then I heard some Asian voices as well. I felt very afraid after hearing the escalated voices in the hallway and curled up in a ball in my bed and began to cry silently. As I was crying, I heard the hotel room door began to open. I laid in bed and prayed for my roommate to come back quickly. I felt like I could not move. I wanted to look at the door to see who was coming into the room but could not. I may have blacked out for a minute or two from the fear I was feeling. When I opened my eyes, I saw 3 men in the room with me. 2 were tall and 1 was shorter. One taller man was at the foot of the bed holding my legs. 1 man was holding my arm down and 1 man was holding my head. At first I thought they were trying to have sex with me or rape me. I was very afraid and kept struggling to get free from them and asking them why they were doing this to me. As I looked at the faces, they changed to people I had encountered at the conference. I began to question if these people were hurting me for some reason. Then the faces changed again back to their original ones I had seen. The 3 men kept talking to me and telling me various things, such as, "This is for your own good. We are not hurting you. These people are hurting you. We need to know if there's anything left. You need to stop talking to people, or bad things will happen to you." Then the man who was holding my arm pulled out a needle and tried to stick it into my arm. I kept fighting him. The man who was holding my head kept trying to put a white pill into my mouth and make me swallow it. I kept spitting the white pill out and turning my head away from him to see what the man holding my arm down was doing. I'm not sure what the man who was holding my legs was doing to me. At one point, the man holding my head pushed the white pill way into the back of my mouth and put some water in my mouth, then tilted my head back and forced me to swallow. At the same time, the man holding my arm gave me an injection, and then I suddenly felt very calm and sleepy. The man by my head gently tilted my head toward him and told me he would make sure that I was okay and would not swallow my tongue. It was best for me to sleep through the rest of this and not remember what was happening to me. I must have fallen asleep at this point. I could, after a while, feel my body being washed down. It felt as though I was being systematically washed for a reason. I was being moved in different positions and washed down with something, and then my skin was dried off. Then I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remember is the hotel room door opening and my roommate coming back into the room. I was still too afraid to move or talk to her, but felt relieved that she was now in the room. She got back into bed and went to sleep. She kept waking up and asking me if I was okay because I kept sitting up in bed trying to stretch my legs and my body. I told her that I hurt really bad and felt like something bad had happened to me. She commented that you can feel like that after they visit you. I did not ask her what she meant by that. I laid down and tried to sleep but could not. My legs still hurt, and I felt very raw vaginally inside as well as itchy and various parts of my body. I waited until I thought she was asleep and then went into the bathroom to check my body for bruises because I hurt so badly. I couldn't sleep, so I left the hotel room and went for a walk downstairs and out by the pool to see if anyone else was still awake. The only other people awake in the hotel were the cleaning crew. I rode the elevator back up to the 2nd floor, and when I got off there was a sign by the elevator which read, "Remember your manual. Do not forget your instructions." The sign struck me as odd. It also had a room number listed on it. I decided to investigate. I went down the hallway, found the room, and put my ear to the door. I could hear movement inside of the room, and then decided to see if my room keycard wouldn't open the door. I inserted it into the slot, and it did not open. I tried it again. The noise inside the room stopped. I then slowly walked back to my hotel room, stopping to use a public restroom on the way. After I used the bathroom, I looked in the toilet and noticed what appeared to be white human tissue. I thought of reaching and grabbing it, but then decided to just not. I had already had 2 mysterious pregnancies and miscarriages, and did not want to go down the road of unexplained tissue, so I flushed the toilet. I then went back to my hotel room to try to sleep. I still could not sleep, so I got up and took my shaver and went back down to the public restroom to shave my legs. I then tried to sleep again in the hotel room. I may have dozed off for a minute or two, but mostly just laid there sore and wide awake. At about 5:30 a.m. I could not lay there any longer and decided it was time for me to get up. I got dressed. My roommate woke up slightly and asked if I was leaving. I told her yes, that I could not sleep and thought it best for me to just go to the airport. She wished me a safe flight and told me to be careful. As I waited in the lobby for the airport shuttle, there were 3 other men also waiting. They looked very similar to the 3 men that I had seen in my hotel room earlier that night. They stood together outside of the hotel and kept looking at me as we were waiting for the shuttle. We all boarded the shuttle together. I sat behind the tall man in the back, and the other 2 men sat on the left side of the shuttle. I felt very disorientated or drugged, but tried to shake it off. A song came on the radio, and I sang along silently to it, still trying to make sense of what had happened to me earlier that evening. None of the men talked to each other on the shuttle to the airport. 2 of the men got off the shuttle with me. They followed me to the check-in point, and then the shorter man told me, "Have a nice flight and try to forget," or something to that extent. I looked down at my luggage and looked up. They were gone. I'm not sure if they disappeared into the crowd or just disappeared. Skipping ahead to the airplane flight home. My seat was in the back of the plane, and a man sat next to me in the aisle seat with a seat between us. During the whole flight he never talked to me, but I felt very tired and disorientated, so I slept for most of the flight. I was aware of people moving around on the plane, but just could not shake the tiredness that I was feeling. When the plane landed in Minneapolis, we started getting off. The man who had sat next to me waited until it was time for me to get off, then he got up and went out the back door of the airplane and disappeared. It struck me as odd for a passenger to exit through the rear of the plane. I got off the plane and waited for a minute or 2 in the ramp into the terminal to see if the man would come this direction. No one else came off the plane. I just decided it was best to forget and went to find my luggage. I got my luggage and waited for the shuttle bus to bring me to my vehicle because I had parked away from the airport. 2 men got onto the shuttle with me. They reminded me of the 2 men that I had seen earlier that morning in California. They did not talk to each other much and did look at me from time to time. They got off the shuttle before me, and then the driver brought me to my vehicle. As I drove away from Minneapolis toward my home, my body began to hurt again, and I began to remember the night before being touched, washed and talked to. The further I drove, the more afraid I felt, until finally I pulled over at a gas station and purchased a car charger for my phone because I had lost mine. I called a friend who advised me to go to the nearest hospital and get checked out, which I did. After talking with other people from Minnesota who had attended the conference, they told me that at the time I was claiming to have been visited or assaulted, that a group of them had been down in near the hotel lobby, and that the hotel fire alarm system had gone off. A few of them had also joked about seeing a craft hovering near the hotel. Amen.
Experiencer recalls MIB gray alien encounters in Navarre Beach, Florida. During my spring break of 1977, my family and 3 other families from the neighborhood I grew up in traveled to a Holiday Inn in Navarre Beach, Florida. My mother had told me it was a newly opened hotel. It had an indoor pool, arcade, gift shop, deli, and small movie theater. For its day, it was considered to be a very nice place, and my family went to this hotel 3 times. During our second visit in August of 1977, the movie Jaws 2 was being filmed at Navarre, and I even got to see the mechanical Jaws stored with other movie equipment and props in the eastern portion of the hotel parking lot. During this spring break vacation, around late March of 1977, there was a special showing of the film Bugsy Malone, where only children were permitted to attend. It was during the film that I started to feel a bit disoriented. I heard some other children crying, and I heard the sound of someone throwing up. At one point in the film, I got up from my chair to leave, but I was quickly escorted back to my chair by an usher in a black suit and black hat. I saw 1 or maybe 2 more men in black suits at the back of the theater. After the film was over, I felt just fine, and I never did complain to anyone about that experience. One evening on this vacation I awoke and sat up in my bed. I looked across the room and could see a group of small figures in the dimly lit room. My brother was asleep to my right and my parents were asleep in the bed to my left. The feeling I felt was something I had felt before, which I immediately recognized. It was a feeling I only have felt when the Greys were near. I thought it's been a while. And to a young boy, it had been over 2 years since his last encounter with the Greys. So it had felt like a long time. But then I could not move, and one of the figures moved towards me very fast, and the last thing I recalled were its big black eyes very close to my face and a wand-like object being pointed at me. Then there was blackness. The next thing I recall was being in the sand dunes away from the hotel in a circle of children. I must have been one of the youngest because I was the shortest. But my attention was more on the blue object directly over us that had a glowing blue light all about it. The closest thing I've seen to this shade of blue would be that of the blue glow of radiation that I've only seen from photos. Then there was blackness. The next morning was a Saturday and I was watching cartoons. It was not until I was watching TV that I then recalled that previous night's experience with the Greys, seeing the blue glowing sphere above me and the other children. I then told one of the other children that were traveling with us on this trip about my experience that night and she did not believe me. I also recall walking around the hotel later that day and then getting up the nerve to tell my older brother who also teased me. Name withheld.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.